was Error 422, and it wants you. This is the story. It all begins billions of years ago in a world far, far away. Now, this world, although it was so incredibly far away, was actually very similar to that of the overworld, in that it had vast expanses of flourishing land filled with thousands of different life forms, and everything was thriving. As the sun was shining, the rivers were flowing, and everyone was happy. It was a very nice world. But on one rainy afternoon, everything would change. As it was on that afternoon that the spirit or the gods of that world would encounter an issue. But this would not just be any minor issue. No. As part of the code that he was made from somehow ended up corrupting. Now, this was bad, very bad, as the entirety of that world, which was known as World 422, was tied to that spirit. And so that meant that the entire world, just like the spirit, began to corrupt. Now, luckily, to begin with, this corruption was almost unnoticeable, and everything just continued to go on as normal. But soon that would change, as just a few days later, the weather within the world began to act very weirdly, as a downpour began to engulf the entirety of that world. And yet, despite that, there were no clouds in the sky, so the rain was just falling from nothing. But it was all good, as just a few days later, the downpour stopped, and thus everything could go back to normal. Well, that was until lightning bolts began to strike down onto the world. But once again, there were no visible storm clouds for these lightning bolts to originate from, meaning that they were just coming from the clear green skies. It was a very odd sight to see. But really, this was just the beginning, and the corruption was about to make this world so much weirder. As just a few hours later, sporadic patches within the world were randomly set ablaze, and they would remain in that burning state for the next few days. Now, that really should have been impossible for these just regular blocks, as they shouldn't have been able to burn that long. But still, that would not be the strangest thing to happen within that world, as just a few days later, all the water within the world suddenly transformed into lava. And all the lava in the world somehow changed the water. It was very strange. But then, just a few hours after that, millions of cacti blocks would just mysteriously be ripped out of the ground, and together they would all begin to float up into the sky. And they just randomly existed there. But this did not just happen to the cactus plant. No, as the same thing happened to lily pads and leaves and dirt blocks. This was wrong, all wrong, as none of these things should ever be happening. But really, there wouldn't be all that much time to think about these strange errors, as just another few hours later, the world would suddenly be exposed to the corrupt code, as that evil code began to leak from the sky. And then, just a few hours after that, the world was suddenly exposed to a strange 3D blur that engulfed everything. And then finally, a few hours after that, the spirit of the world would arrive on the surface of his world at last. Now, many did believe that he was here because he was going to fix all these issues, but no, he wasn't, as he was, after all, the source of all this corruption. And thus, due to that corruption, he had changed from the noble hero that he once was, as he was no longer Spirit 422. Instead, he was the evil Error 422, as the corruption had consumed him and made him evil. And so the moment that he arrived on the surface of his world, the entire world was annihilated, as the entire world became quickly consumed by the void, as the world had just become too unstable. And so that was it. That was the end of World 422. And thus, it should have also been the end of Error 422. But it wasn't. As although Error 422 had just lost his world, he was still alive, as the corrupt code that had ruined him was strong, very strong, and so it was able to keep Error 422 from dying, even whilst he himself was in the deadly depths of the void. Now, this really should not have been the case whatsoever, as the void should have killed him almost instantly, as the void was meant to be able to destroy and kill anything and everything, and that included the almighty spirits. However, Error 422 was just too powerful for any of that, and thus it would be over the next few days that Error 422 would begin to drift this empty void and would explore it. However, this protection that he had gained from that corrupted code wasn't perfect, and thus over that time, Error 422 was taking rather significant damage. So much so in fact that he became very close to dying. And so, this might actually be it. This might be his end. Or maybe not, as the code sent a message to Error 422.
Go now, spread your presence across the universe, infect every world, and if you can do that, you will gain powers beyond your comprehension, and if you do so, nothing will ever be able to stop us.
Now, Error 422 was rather shocked to hear that code, as he never imagined it to be, well, sentient. But even so, it just didn't matter, as he just couldn't go to another world, even if he wanted to, as he was just going to have to stay here in the dark, endless, and dangerous void, as there was just no way that he would be able to get out of this place before he dies. Well, that's what he thought, until he saw the light. That was another world, and so Error 422 quickly teleported over to it. And well, the moment that he arrived at that new world, he was saved. But at the same time, that world began to corrupt, going through the exact same changes that the world 422 did just days prior. And so, seeing this corruption happening, the spirit, or god, of this new world quickly jumped down to oppose this Error 422 that was attempting to corrupt his world. And well, the moment that he arrived, Error 422 lunged into an attack. And as he had the power of the corrupted code on his side, he was able to kill that spirit in only a few punches. And once he was dead, Error 422 stole that spirit soul and his powers. Now, this was very hard on Error 422, as despite being corrupted himself, he also knew in the back of his mind that this spirit was likely just trying to save its world like he would have done. But he also knew that he had to do this. He had to kill him and take his world and all of his powers. Because if he didn't, he was going to die. And really, he was selfish and only cared for himself. And so now, with that spirit gone, Error 422 was very quickly able to take control of that world and corrupt it fully. However, he also knew that he couldn't stay there forever, as the corruption that he exerted would likely cause this world to be destroyed, just like his home world. And so he knew he had to leave it. And thus, just a few days later, he teleported over to the next nearest world. And well, when he arrived, he did the exact same thing as he did with that first world, in that he killed the spirits, stole their soul and powers, and then corrupted their world. And so that cycle would repeat over and over and over for the next million years, as Error 422 would grow his empire of corrupted worlds into the billions. And because every world that he corrupted, he would be granted with more and more powers, he soon became one of the most powerful entities to ever exist within the Minecraft universe. A fact that would be proved when he consumed and corrupted his 10 billionth world. As it would be then that all those powers from all those different spirits would be compounded to give Error 422 the ability of true immortality. An ability that had never been achieved before by anyone else. And so this meant that nothing could possibly kill him now. Not even the void could kill him or even damage him anymore. As now, Error 422 had transcended the concept of death. And more than that, he would soon gain the ability to transcend the game itself, as he soon uncovered the dark truth about the Minecraft world that he was living in. As he learned that he was living in a game, a simulation almost, and thus he and everything around him were just lines of code. Now that sounds like a rather devastating thing for Error 422 to learn about, but it wasn't, as it actually allowed the entity of Error 422 to achieve godlike status, as he was then able to control that simulation, as he was the only one that was aware of that simulation. And so now, using all of his powers, he could change the code, and thus he gained admin powers over the Minecraft universe. So this was it. This was his peak potential, and no other entity will ever reach what he has. And well, Error 422 was very happy to know that, as now nothing was going to stop him, and he was going to take control and corrupt the entire universe. And so it was then that Error 422 would set his sights onto one particular world, that being the overworld. Now, Error 422 had always dreamed of corrupting the overworld, and he likely could have attacked it and won that corruption much sooner. But the issue with that was that the overworld spirit was very, very powerful, likely the most powerful in existence, excluding himself. And not only that, the overworld spirit had the ability to call on as many spirits as there were in the universe. So really, he had the ability to put up quite a fight, as he could literally summon an army of gods. And so it was because of that that Error 422 needed to make sure that he was ready for the fight, and that there would be no possible way that he would lose it. And well, now he was at that point. He didn't think that there was even a chance of a loss. And so with that, he teleported to the overworld. And well, he was ecstatic. He couldn't wait to take this world, as after all, the overworld was the original world. And so, once he was able to take it, then nothing would be in his way for complete universal control. And so, once he was ready, he began the corruption. And it was working. Thus, just a few minutes later, the overworld spirit would be forced to come down from the heavens and attempt to fight Error 422, as the overworld spirit needed to try and stop the spreading of this corruption. However, he was unable to, as Error 422 was just too powerful, and so for that reason, Error 422 was able to kill the overworld spirit, and he did it in just one hit. Yes, this was it now. He had removed any possible opposition. And so it was over the next few minutes that he was able to take control of the entire overworld and corrupt it. And thus, he was now only days away from complete universal control. However, as Error 422 was standing there, taking in this new world that his empire was starting to grow into, a soul from one of the dead beings rose into the sky and ran straight into the brains of Error 422. And so, with that, he was given a vision. He was seeing the future, and he could see himself. He was standing on the final world, and everything was glowing green, as he was just about to get complete control of everything, as he was about to corrupt the final world. But then something happened. A strange message appeared that covered his entire vision. It said something about deleting a world, and then it disappeared. But the moment that happened, everything just began to be even more corrupted. And then he, Error 422, just vanished. Oh no. He could still see his soul floating there, but if he was seeing his soul, then he was going to die from that. How? He was immortal. But before he could get the answer for that, the vision ended. This was bad. Very bad. As if that vision was actually a true reflection of the future. Then he was doomed. As it was just far too late now, as he was already on the unstoppable trajectory of complete control. And thus, he was already on the trajectory for death. And there was nothing he could do to stop that. And so he just stood there, trying to think of how he might be able to reverse this inevitable death that he was facing. But nothing came to mind. So maybe this time it was going to be it. Maybe he was going to die and was going to suffer like all the other worlds that he infected. Or maybe not, as he suddenly had an idea, as perhaps he could rewind time to before he was corrupted, and then he could stop himself from ever becoming the Error 422. That might work, as if he never became this monster, then he wouldn't be dying right now. That was a genius idea, and so he began to rewind time. However, he was just too stressed out by all of this, and so for that reason, he accidentally rewound time far too much, as he went back before his corruption, before even his creation, before even the overall spirit's creation, before anything existed, really, as he went back 4 trillion years ago. This was bad, as he was unable to skip time to go forward into the future. So for that reason, he was going to have to be here, alone in this nothingness for the next few trillion years, waiting until the first spirit was created. And well, he really just did not want to do that, as if he did that, he would be incredibly bored and would be living a very dull life. And so instead, he had a new idea. Perhaps he could remove the corrupted code side of himself, and thus could return to being Spirit 422. And in that form, he would be able to create a new world, as he would no longer be in his corrupt destruction mode. That might work. And so, Error 422 ripped out the corrupted side of him, using all of the strength that he had. And well, it took him a few years of using his full might and power on himself when he was finally able to rip out that corruption. However, that evil corrupted code was the thing that was keeping him alive after his world was destroyed, and was what made him immortal. And so without that, the spirit died in seconds. So that's it. That's the end of the story. Right? Well, no, as the corrupted code would soon attach itself to a new entity, and well, that entity would quickly grow into the peak strength and power of Error 422. But this time, that entity would not be so impatient, as that entity would be willing to wait 1 trillion years to gain complete control and revenge. But to learn more about them and what they did next, then you'll need to watch this video.